Welcome to the EarthtonesGirl Channel. My name is Denise, and this is the first class in my new Sock Shorties series. I am so excited to be here with you today and to continue to share, inspire, and encourage you on your sock knitting journey. One note about these classes before we jump into the good stuff is I will be trying my best to upload weekly, but the classes are not going to be in any particular order or sequence. There will be a natural progression in the classes, but you don't have to follow them as I upload them. You can, and once there are more videos available, you can pick and choose the ones that you want to watch based on the information or the help that you're looking for. So today's class, our first class, I thought it was important to start by talking about gauge and how that applies to sock knitting. So to keep it simple, gauge basically means how many stitches and how many rows you are getting per inch in 1 inch of knitted fabric. It is usually measured over 4 inches, but considering the average width of a sock, which I have here, considering the average width of a sock, this is usually, it could be about 4 inches, but sometimes a little bit less, or if you're working on a toddler sock. So we're going to aim for we're aiming for that inch to 2 inches, okay? So when it comes to gauge and sock knitting, you are aiming for something called negative ease. Gauge with socks is different from a regular garment. In a regular garment, whether that's a sweater, usually in sweaters, you want positive ease. So you want to have a little bit more room, and I'm kind of doing this to demonstrate more of like a swishing. You don't necessarily want your garment or your sweater to fit you really, really tight. Maybe you do, but on the average, you have what's called positive ease, and that's just how much extra room you have on the sides or on front to back in your sweater. With sock knitting, you don't want any of that. You want your sock, unless you're making slippers, what you want is your sock to hug your foot. You don't want it to be pulled tight over your foot. You just want it to hug your foot. You want that negative ease so that when you're sliding the sock on, you have to stretch it just enough to slide it onto your foot, and then it clings. Okay, it almost springs back and hugs your foot. So that is what we're going to be covering today. So how do you measure that? I'm going to demonstrate that in just one moment. But what I suggest is you take a sock that you've already made. Doesn't matter if it's toe up or top down. Really doesn't matter. Take a sock that you have issue with. A sock that you've completed, but it just doesn't fit right. There's just something about it, whether it's a little baggy at the ankle, or it's too loose at the ankle, too baggy at the ankle, or possibly too tight across the ball of the foot, or even too tight at the ankle or too tight at the leg. So let's take a look at a sock and see how to measure gauge, and then I'm going to talk you through how to take those measurements and apply them to custom fit a sock for yourself. Let's start by talking about the tools we are going to use to measure the gauge. I have 3 different tools here, 2 different rulers, and a tape measure. Your standard issue tape measure, inches on one side, centimeters, upside down, centimeters on the other, flexible. This can go in your notions pouch. Then I have this ruler that is just a 2-inch, a 2x2 window here. It has centimeters on one side and inches down here on the bottom. It is a much smaller window and also has your needle gauge here on the side, so in case you forget what size needle you're using. And then I just have here, this ruler is by Katrinkles. This particular one was made for a shop owned by a friend of mine. It's Frame and Fiber. And this particular ruler is by Twig and Horn. It's a little bit bigger. You can use it for garments as well as your socks. It has the centimeters running along 2 sides, and you have your inches running along the other side. This gives you that 4-inch window, whereas this one will give you a 2-inch window. Okay, just depends on what you need, and if you want to have one sort of all-purpose tool for everything, or if you'd like to have multiple tools based on what you're doing. So let's start with the tape measure. Just going to move these over to the side for a moment. Now, a tape measure is what most of us usually have in our bag, okay? And we're going to measure this sock. So let's just come in a little closer here. Here we go. And we're going to measure. Now, again, with the ruler, you can only measure in one direction at a time, okay? Not a hindrance or a problem, just is what it is. So what we're going to measure here is how many stitches we are getting in an inch, okay? Now, what does the stitch look like? The stitches are the little V's. Let's pull this in a little bit closer here. All right, your stitches are the little V's that you are creating as you knit. So I have lined the edge of my ruler up right in between two stitches, and I am going to count across. As a matter of fact, let me grab a needle. I'm going to pause for just one moment and grab a needle because my finger is going to get in the way. So I couldn't find a knitting needle, but I did have a tapestry needle. What you want to do is lay your sock flat. You don't want to push or pull or tweak it in any way. Just lay it flat, and you're going to count your stitches. Okay, so I have lined up, let me move my fingers a little. I have lined this up right at the edge of a stitch, and I'm going to count across to get the number of stitches per inch. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the 1 inch mark falls right in the center of a 9th stitch. So that is going to be 8.5 stitches to the inch that I'm getting. And now we're going to measure our row gauge. So I'm going to line my needle, line the tape measure up right at the top of a stitch, and I'm going to see how many rows I'm getting in an inch. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's like just shy. So it would be like 11 3/4, but we're just going to round that off to 12. So that is how many rows I am getting in an inch. Now, let's see that with one of the rulers. So here I have the twig and horn ruler, and I'm going to start from this corner edge and work my way out, and then the corner edge and work my way down to that 1 inch mark. So from here, I'm getting, it's a little bit dark, but I'm going to come down 1 row. I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I'm right in the center once again of that 9th stitch. So that's 8.5 stitches in 1 inch. And now let's measure down, down to the 1 inch mark here. So I'm getting 1, there is a stitch here at the top. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Because the end of it, actually more like 12.5, okay? But I'm going to round that off to the 12, all right? And that is how I would use the ruler here. Same thing would apply with using the other smaller ruler, okay? And that is how you use those rulers. The second set of measurements that you want to take, you've just taken your sock measurements on an existing sock. The second set of measurements that you want to take is actually on your foot. So you are going to measure around the circumference of the area on your leg where you want your sock to reach. I'll say that again. When you pull your sock on, okay, if that reaches maybe 6 inches above your ankle, you're going to measure that circumference right at that area. If you like your socks to be a little taller, if you're making knee socks or something higher, then you measure that circumference at the height where you want your sock to be. So you're going to take a measurement there, then you're going to take your ankle measurement. I'm actually reaching down for my ankle. I'm not going to try to lift my foot up because that would be fun for no one. So you're going to, I'm looking at my notes here. So you're going to take your leg measurement, the circumference, your ankle circumference, and then the circumference of the ball of your foot. That's the widest part of your foot. Your ankle and the ball of your foot in theory, for the normal foot or the average size foot, although I don't believe that there is any such thing, should match. They should be about the same. So if your ankle is measuring 8 inches, then the ball of your foot should be approximately the same. That does not apply to everyone. You may have a difference there. In my case, the circumference around my leg was 9 inches. I'm getting 8.5 stitches to the inch, but for the sake of math, I'm going to just round down to 8. Let's say I'm getting 8 stitches to the inch, which is approximately what most patterns call for. And around my leg is 9 inches around. My stitch gauge, again, I'm using a rounder number because it's just easier to figure out the math, but this will apply whether you're using 8, 8.5, 9, 9.5, etc. So that distance, okay, so 9 times 8 is going to be 72 stitches. Now, you don't want to cast on 72 stitches because you want that negative ease, okay? So you're going to subtract 1 inch, 1 from that 9, so you're down to 8 inches now. 8 times 8 is 64. That's how you would get to that 64 stitches. When a designer is designing their stocks, that's basically how they're getting those numbers, okay? So my original number was 72, but because of the negative ease, I'm down 8 stitches, so I'm going to cast on 64. So I'm casting on my 64 stitches, but now my ankle measures 7.5. Okay? So my ankle actually, I'm sorry, my leg measures 9, my ankle is measuring 8.5. But I want to subtract that negative ease again, so now I'm going to get 7.5. I hope you're following me. So I'm going to multiply 7.5 by that 8, and I'm going to get 60 stitches. So that's a 4-stitch difference. That's not a tremendous difference when you're knitting your sock, but if that number were bigger, you're going to get that bagginess in the center. So what you want to do then is decrease the number of stitches over a distance. Okay, I hope this is all making sense. If you have any questions at any point, please feel free to write your questions down in the comments below, and I will be happy to answer them there, or even do a follow-up if anything you want a little more tweaking on math or anything like that. So basically, again, I've done all of my math, and I now have a 4-stitch difference. The length now, here's where your row gauge comes in. Now, row gauge can be tricky, okay, because you're pulling your sock on. It can be a little bit tricky. So you're going to measure that distance now from where the top of the sock is going to fit to your ankle, okay? And by ankle, I'm measuring right above my ankle bone, that inner bone, that medial side bone. That distance for me, just double checking my notes, is 6 inches. But I want to get rid of those 4 stitches if you really want to be precise, okay? Now, let's say that top number, mine was 9. Let's say that top number for you is 10 or 11 or 12, but your ankle is measuring 6 or 7. That's a big difference. So this is going to be important for you. What you want to do then is I'm going to say this really slowly. That distance from the top of the sock to the ankle, in my case, is 6 inches. I am going to decrease 4 stitches over that distance. Okay, so I'm going to divide that distance by the number of stitches. So it's going to be 3 inches. Every 3 inches, I'm going to do decreases because I want to decrease 4 stitches. So I'm dividing that in half because I'm going to do 2 and then another 2. Okay, so I cast on. When I knit about 3 inches down, I'm going to do the first set of decreases. Then I'm going to knit a little more, do the second set of decreases, and I'm down to that 60. Perfect. So now I am ready to start my heel. But now, if you're working in a pattern, the pattern is going to give you those heel numbers. But what if your numbers are a little bit different? How do you do that? How do you figure that out? Now, there's a really amazing reference. I cannot share that with you because it is from a book. But the book is called Sock Innovation by Cookie A. And on page 15, I talk about this in my classes all the time. On page 15 is a chart. There is a chart there for a heel, flap, and gusset. And what it does is it works out all of the numbers for your heel flap and your heel turn as well as the gusset based on any number of stitches that you have for that half of your sock, because usually you're knitting your heel over half the number of stitches. So this chart will give you all of those numbers, okay? It's really, really worth it to get. Now, an alternative to that, there are patterns out there that have slightly different numbers in them. Instead of your standard small, medium, and large, they have slightly different numbers. Two patterns that I find really, really helpful are and this may be just economically a little bit easier for you than buying a book or looking for a book, etc., is the Rye Light socks. And I will put all of this in the description box for you down below. Rye Light socks by Tin Can Knits. And also the I'm So Basic socks by Summer Lee. Okay, and she's Summer Lee Designs. Those patterns will be linked down below. And I will link to Amazon. That's usually where I buy my books from. Or if you can find the book at your local yarn shop, you can do that. I will link to the Sock Innovation book as well. Those three are a really good resource because they have multiple sizes, from toddler up to extra large. And I did have a viewer once ask about increasing, like if they needed an extra large because the circumference may be 10 inches for them. So those are your resources. And there are many, many other patterns that that have those alternative numbers instead of just locking you into that small, medium, and large. But now, with this class, you have the math now to figure this all out for yourself. And I'm going to put these equations down in the show notes for you, okay? Because I know some of you are sitting there like, wait, what did she say? What did she say a minute ago? And you're trying really hard to write it down. I know where you are. So I will put the equation down in the show notes for you, okay? So that is basically what you're doing then is it's all basic math that you're doing. It's the widest part of your leg based on your ankle. Now, if you don't want to do any of this math at all, here is an alternative. When I first started sock knitting, the thought of a vanilla sock with just plain stockinette seemed like it would just be too baggy. And this is before I even understood all of the math. It just seemed like the sock would be too baggy. And the first sock that I ever knit was a 2x2 rib sock. And that's here. And I'm purposely not putting it on the blocker so that you can see how skinny that leg is. Now, when you look at the leg on a vanilla sock, and then you look at the leg on a rib sock, do you see that huge difference? Let's just lay that over. Look at that. Okay. The stockinette sock always seemed like it would just be too slouchy and too loose. Okay. Here is my rib sock. It's going to hug all the way down. That's the nature of the ribbing. All right. So quick solution, if you don't want to have to do all of the math, you can add a little bit of ribbing. You can work your cuff. You can have a plain stockinette section and then start ribbing. Okay. It's just aesthetics. Or you can rib the entire length of the sock, the cuff, just continue on, just to the entire cuff and leg is all the 2x2, and then it continues over, let's pull this out, continues over the top of the sock, and then just plain stockinette on the bottom. Okay, so now you have worked your leg, you've worked down to the ankle, you've worked your heel flap, okay, you've tweaked your numbers a little bit, whether it's with the chart from the book or from a pattern. You finished your decreases for your gusset, but let's say you need the ball of your foot is a little bit wider, so you need to increase. You have two options there. You can stop working the gusset stitches when you get to that number, and you're going to measure. You're going to do the same measurement. So you're going to measure the ball of your foot. Let's say that's 8 times your gauge, which is 8. So you need to get back to 64 stitches, but your ankle was at 60. Okay? You can stop your gusset decreases when you get to 60 stitches. Okay? When you get to 64 stitches. Let me say that again. You're working your gusset. The gusset decreases. You can stop working the decreases when you get back to 64 stitches, which is the number you need for the ball of your foot. So you had 60 at the ankle, You're going to need 64 for the ball of your foot. So just stop your gusset stitches when you get to 64 and continue knitting down your foot. Now, the other option is work all of your decreases back down to 60 and then start increasing again, okay? Because your foot may need a little bit, instead of you're knitting this way, okay? So you're knitting straight, but your foot may need this. So what you can do is put increases on either side at that same intervals, okay? You can do it every 3 inches, you can do it every 2 inches. It's just how gradual or how rapid you want those increases now to be to accommodate the width of your foot. I hope this is all making sense. Let me know. Please let me know in the comments down below. So let's talk about troubleshooting. If your sock is bunching, it may mean whether that's at the ankle or at around the foot or around the leg at any point, 2 things are going on. You may need fewer stitches or you may need to decrease your needle size, okay? Keep in mind when you're decreasing your needle size, you're also changing your gauge a little bit, all right? Unfortunately, sock knitting is not absolutely an exact science. There is a lot of practice and it does require a lot of trial and error with figuring this out. When I first started knitting socks, I did not get any of this in the very beginning. My socks were a little bit off. Sometimes they were loose, sometimes they were too tight. Things I didn't factor in. I remember knitting a pair of socks when I was pregnant with my daughter and happily knitting away when I went to put them on, did not fit. Didn't fit. To this day, I've kept them. To this day, they don't fit because I now had pregnancy feet and my feet had grown. So there is a little bit of trial and error when it comes to that. Now, let's say you've got your sock and it's now too tight. So what can start to happen is you're wondering why your sock is wearing out at the heel or at the ball of the foot. That can be caused by 2 things. Sometimes if your stitch gauge is too loose, so I used to knit at 7 stitches to the inch, that's too loose. So what would happen is the pressure of my foot in my shoe walking on those looser stitches caused those fibers to start doing this. Okay, it caused them to start to spread. So this pressure, and they're spreading, and they're getting thinner, and it's wearing out. The opposite can also happen. If those stitches are really, really tight, they're being compressed and there's a friction that's going on and it's starting, can you see, I'm moving my hands back and forth. There's a friction that's starting to happen. So you're going to start wearing out the fabric that you've created because those stitches are just too tight. So again, it's playing around with, do I increase the stitches? And do one thing at a time. Don't do both. Don't increase your needle size and change your stitch count, or decrease your needle size and change your stitch count. Try one, see if it works, then try the other, see if that works. Again, it is a little bit of trial and error. But the more socks that you knit, the better you're going to get at your sock knitting. And don't look at anything being a waste of time. So now you've knit your socks and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. I have to rip this whole thing out. You don't. You might have to, but I'm saying don't look at it as a waste of time. It's more practice for you, okay? It's practice. The masters of anything have practiced for countless hours, and it's an opportunity to fine-tune a skill that you are building for yourself, okay? So that is basically gauge. That is very basic math on tweaking your socks. If you have any questions at all, please leave a comment down below for me. Again, I could go on and on about this topic for hours, but just to keep things simple, I'm going to talk about heels and other things in other classes, so there is lots more to come. And I can't wait to share it all with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the first class in the Sock Shorties series, and I will see you all again very soon. Happy sock knitting, everyone.